So we're covering something else from David Gauke that he'd recently written for the New Statesman. And we've already talked about David Gauke a bit, but I think it's worth just saying why sometimes I'm going over people like David Gauke. And that is because right now there are a lot of very politically homeless conservatives. There's a lot out there. You know, they don't feel that the direction of the Conservative Party is one that they recognise. A vast majority of them have gone and voted Lib Dems and have gone to the Lib Dems. For them, that's probably going to be their new permanent home. But there are a lot of Conservatives out there that are still feeling a bit political homeless. And that is because I think at the moment they really don't have figures that they can rally around, that they can fight with in the Conservative Party. And bear in mind, I think that is something that they need at the moment. Figures who they can do. So part of the reason why I'm doing this video and these types of videos is because those can then reach out to those Conservatives and say, actually, this is someone you should be listening to. You should be listening to this guy. Go give this guy a talk. And I'm not a Conservative, but I know from my stuff doing Conservative Home, etc., stuff like that, I know there have been Conservatives who watch my channel. That's fine. Just know we're not going to agree 100% of the time, but hey, that's fine. That's politics. But ultimately, the idea is that eventually there will be a civil war, like a real full-blown civil war in the Tory party. And those people that are currently politically homeless, they are the ones that, if they decide that they are going to remain, as part of that Conservative faction, then they need figures to rally around. They need to know who is going to be, the figures they can start listening to, arguments that they can start listening to from these people that they can then take to other people that are also, politically homeless Conservatives and start to rally them around, because eventually that will start to affect the Conservative Party. And over time, again, I'm not going to do this by myself. I know how small my voice is in all this, so I'm not being very big-headed, thinking I can somehow affect, the Conservative Party. But, do these things through, the way that I'm sort of titling these videos, doing sort of the description, it gets out there in the algorithm, and people will see these, and they will go, all right, David Gauke, someone I should follow. Rory Stewart, someone I should follow. These types of voices they need, and they will need them for the future battles to come. So today we're going to go over, like I say, David Gauke again, even though we've already covered him just this week as well. He wrote a piece again for the New Statement about why Nigel Farage will not become the next Prime Minister. And bear in mind, at the moment, we have seen so much things for the past week or so that have basically been from the Conservatives like, oh my God, we're panicking about reform. We're panicking about reform. But I've said to you guys many, many times, the Conservatives' biggest threat is not reform. It's the Lib Dems. It's the Lib Dems. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But needless to say, I think people like David Gauke and many of those are sort of like, politically sort of homeless Conservatives who got booted out, in 2019 or in and around those areas, or basically got pushed to the sidelines. They're going to be starting building back up because they're now watching and waiting, I think, for the fall, certainly of Kimmy Badenoch, because Kimmy Badenoch really is the right side of the Conservatives, I think, last roll of the dice. At that point, I don't think the One Nation Conservatives are going to stand for having another right-wing candidate. I don't think that they're going to be very happy with sort of their own party. I think they'll start looking at what's going to happen to the membership. And I've said that before. If the Conservative Party is ever going to recover, it has to look at its membership and go, that's a bit of a problem as well. But again, that's another video maybe for another time. But yes, I definitely want to get on to covering this because I think, again, it is very important to sort of get his sort of voice out there and sort of try and attract more people to sort of listening to him, especially those sort of disenfranchised sort of conservatives. So, as always, thank you very much to all the people who do help and support the channel. Like I say, click on the like, click on the share button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one for donation called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this from the New Statesman with the title of Nigel Farage will not become Prime Minister. So, uncomfortable though as it is to acknowledge, now is a very good time for Reform UK. One recent poll put the party ahead of Labour, and it is only marginally just behind the Conservatives. There have been a few notable Tory defections, of course, the former MP Andrea Jenkins and Conservative founder Tim Montgomery, and inevitably, talk of more to come. And of course, immigration is in the news following the announcement that net migration for the previous 2 years reached 1.6 million people. Perhaps above all, events in the US have given, of course, Nigel Farage and his party a boost. Farage's leadership, with President-elect Donald Trump, does give the reform leader the ability to speak with authority on US policy and the opportunity to create mischief. His links with Elon Musk could also give reform access to financial resources well beyond anything available to other parties. And again, something Labour should absolutely be looking at and making sure that that doesn't happen. Reforming those things will definitely be needed to be definitely looked at. Musk's, of course, newfound obsession with UK politics, uninhibited by, of course, the knowledge or even mature judgment, may prove to be one of the most consequential developments of recent months. Trump's election victory itself does show a party of the populist right could win an election in a first-past-the-post system. Trump and Farage are, of course, not just a similar policy agenda, but a similar political style. Macho, disruptive, willing to outrage, capable of deploying humor, and of course, a swaggering celebrity can win nearly 50% of the vote in the US. The argument will then go, well, why can reform not win here? The central argument of this article is that in all probability, that will not happen. But there is no denying that Farage and Reform do have an opportunity. At the last election, Reform emerged from almost nowhere. As in its previous form, the Brexit Party, it failed to win a single seat in the 2019 general election and didn't even stand in more than 300 constituencies the Tories defended, including 4 of the 5 seats the Reform won in the following election. It now sits, of course, in second place at 98 seats, and 89 of them, of course, held by Labour. The analysis, of course, of the pollster Peter Keller also shows that in the Red Wall, that 31 seats of the traditional safe Labour seats captured by the Tories in 2019, but won back by Keir Starmer in 2024, the Labour vote actually fell. Even, of course, with Jeremy Corbyn off the scene and Brexit now much less of an issue, the party parts of the country have now drifted away from Labour, even as it won a landslide. There is no, of course, particular reason to believe that this trend can actually be easily reversed. There is a part of the electorate who do feel very alienated and angry and who want change. This desire obviously drove them to vote for Brexit in 2016 and for Boris Johnson in 2019. And some of these voters switched to Reform in 2024. And there is every chance that at least more will follow next time. Labour will only have recovered the red wall, at least temporarily. There is, of course, however, a world of difference between winning a dozen seats at the next election and winning hundreds, as Farage now suggests this is on the cards. And it is very true. I do agree with him, and as he's about to go into, I've made this point time and time again. Politics in the UK and the US wildly different. Want a perfect example? Go watch the video I did about Kimmy Badenoch's speech in Washington. That was the most cringiest thing I think I've ever seen. And yet you've got her own party looking at that and going, yeah, that's not a good look. Because if she doubles down into that and decides to go full culture war, which, bear in mind, at the moment, she is panicking. A lot of Conservative MPs are now panicking that they've picked an absolute lemon of a leader again. High hopes immediately that they were going to have this like instant recovery. because after all, the narrative in the Conservative Party is that, actually the British population just secretly yearns for conservative leadership. Then you would be expecting an almost instantaneous recovery. That hasn't happened. Not only that, the very same problems that plagued the Conservative Party prior to the general election are still there. Like, they are all still baked into the Conservative Party. They ain't going anywhere yet. So they're still in trouble. Monumental trouble. But there ain't anyone anytime soon at the moment. I mean, even David Gauke, remember, he's not, he might be sort of a party member. I think he rejoined the party, but still at this moment in time, he's not has any real effect on the party itself. He can only sort of do these types of things and hopefully try and convince people, this isn't going to happen. But bear in mind, this is the New Statesman. This is sort of normally touted as like a Labour sort of, place, whereas maybe you get like the Spectator is more like the conservative version of this, and like the New Statesman is like their version of the Spectator. So again, it's right subject, I think wrong magazine. I don't think the Spectator wanted this. I think that's why I went to the New Statesman. But hey, gets his name out there. And of course advances his argument, and I think he is right on a lot of this stuff that he says about this. So, for the start, the UK, of course, is not the US. Again, as I just said, the Democrats, of course, alienated many of the traditional voters on cultural issues in a manner that Labour has generally avoided. Again, I don't think cultural issues are what lost the Democrats that particular election, but again, that'll be another sideline we could go off in talking about for hours. Feel free to talk about that in the comments. The US system also means that voters do have very little choice but to vote for one of two parties. For them, from the outside, it is very remarkable that the Republican coalition of support fell behind someone who is now tried to overturn an election. But that party does reflect the binary nature of American politics. In a multi-party system, the ceiling of support for populist right, of course, is lower. On that subject of the US, Farage's closeness to Trump is, of course, a double-edged sword. It does give Farage a status, but he will at least hope it will also be exposed if it starts to go wrong for Trump, which is more likely than not. Trump, of course, is not popular in the UK, and of course with other Reform UK supporters. But this does take to a wider problem now with Reform. Their supporters are different to the rest of the country. On their attitude to Trump or even the anti-immigration riots of the summer, most of the country takes one view and Reform supporters take another. That might change, but at the moment, it also now limits the party's potential appeal. Again, very true indeed. They have a ceiling, they have an upper limit. This may be as far as they ever get. Same for the Green Party. This may just be their upper limit. Oh, congratulations, you've got 5 MPs, but what real power does that give you in Parliament? Yes, you've got a voice there, but just like the Greens, they haven't been really using it, shall we say, much recently, partly because the party's in a bit of a mess at the moment, but never mind. That's another video. Of course, you offer, the economy and, of course, public services might, of course, be able to help on these issues of Farage trying to appeal to at least new voters. He does favour lower public spending and, of course, allow for tax cuts and has little time for the NHS. Whatever the merits of his opinions, they are not ideally suited to winning over large parts of the electorate who lean left on these issues. Again, David Gauke rightly pointing out, people want high public spending. They don't mind high taxes if it's going on public spending, and they like the NHS. When all the Conservatives talk about, but we want lower public spending, lower taxes, kind of out of step with what the rest of the British public actually wants. Even their own voters don't want those things as well. Another, of course, leader might, of course, be better placed to try and address this vulnerability. But at present, there is no one in the party who comes close to matching Farage's abilities. In reality, reform's prospects are very dependent on their ability and desire to lead, even if it leaves the party exposed now on important issues. None of this is, of course, to minimise the impact of reform that is likely to have on the course of the next parliament. Labour, of course, now struggle to respond to demands of office. The Conservatives have now have had the complete stuffing knocked out of them. Living standards are now barely rising. Public discontent may well grow. But there is an opportunity for an insurgent populist party to emerge as a proper propellant parliamentary force at the next election. Further, of course, fracturing our political system. This in itself is a significant development, but we are not on the cusp of a Farage-led government. No, that still appears to be a very distant prospect. And I agree with David Gauck on this. I think he's right on that. Like I say, I agree with I don't agree with him politically on a lot of his other stuff that he said. We'll probably certainly agree when it comes to Europe. I think on that, I think we probably sort of would agree on, but I think on a vast other things we would disagree. But I think he's right on this. I think his analysis of Farage and the party is spot on. It's has a very limited appeal. It might be quite a populist right party, but how many populist right parties can actually succeed? Again, I remind you of the chart. 25% electorate say they are right wingers, 35% say they are centrists, and 25 say they are lefties. And remember that if you look back a couple of years ago, the centrists were 30%. They've gone up to 35. The right and the left haven't grown. So it shows you where a lot of the power, a lot of the voters really are in the UK. But again, I will say to many of my left-wing viewers, you look at how a lot of the stuff, the populist stuff and populism, like left-wing populism and like progressive stuff, actually polls incredibly well when you take out things like, this is a socialist policy. If you say it's socialist policy, people back off. But if you don't say it's a socialist policy, you don't include that language, you don't include that rhetoric, it evolves. People suddenly go, oh, that's actually quite a good idea. So it's just something that the left needs to do, sort of evolve their language, evolve their thinking about how they talk about some of this stuff. But I've said before, I got problems with a lot of things on the left, how bad we do sort of certain elements of politics. That and rhetoric certainly are one of them. So, of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.